The morning Caden Voss stepped outside and found his Tesla gone, he did three things. He screamed. He called 911. And he pointed his finger directly at the man standing quietly on the porch next door, a 63-year-old retired Marine named Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Earl Kowalski, who was holding a mug of black coffee, watching the sunrise, and wearing an expression that could only be described as entirely unsurprised. "He stole my car," Caden was shouting into his phone, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "My neighbor, the old guy next door, he had it towed." The dispatcher asked if he'd been in a dispute with the neighbor. Caden paused. "I mean kind of, but that's not the point." Raymond took a sip of his coffee. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Because what happened that morning on Loblolly Court in Cedarwood Falls, Virginia, that wasn't the beginning of the story. That was the end of a very long, very patient, very carefully planned one. And let me tell you, it started with a driveway. Cedarwood Falls is the kind of place people move to when they're done with the city. It sits about 22 miles southwest of Richmond, tucked into the gentle hills of Chesterfield County, Virginia. The kind of town where the fire station still has a hand-painted sign, where the gas station sells live bait, and where 4th of July means fireworks over the reservoir and somebody's grandma bringing deviled eggs to a folding table in somebody else's yard. Loblolly Court was a cul-de-sac of 11 homes, built in the late 1980s when the lumber money was still good and people still believed in wide front porches and two-car garages. Big oaks lined both sides of the street. Spanish moss hung from the older ones. In October, those trees turned amber and gold, and the light came through them like something out of a painting. In the spring of 2019, when this story begins, the street smelled like dogwood blooms and fresh-cut grass. Mrs. Patricia Yoon at number 4 still brought cookies to new neighbors. The Okafor family at number 7 let their kids ride bikes in the cul-de-sac until well past dark because everyone knew everyone and nobody worried. It was, for all practical purposes, one of the last genuinely peaceful streets in America. Number 9 Loblolly Court sat at the curve of the cul-de-sac, slightly elevated on a small rise with a long concrete driveway that ran straight from the street to a detached two-car garage. Mature boxwoods flanked the walkway. There was a flagpole in the front yard, always flying, always lit at night as regulations required. That was Raymond Kowalski's house. And that driveway, that modest, unremarkable strip of concrete, was about to become the center of a war. Let me tell you about Raymond Earl Kowalski. Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired, 26 years of service. In at 18, out at 44, and not a single one of those years wasted. Raymond grew up in Hamtramck, Michigan, the son of a Polish-American tool-and-die machinist and a woman who cleaned office buildings 3 nights a week to keep the lights on. He enlisted in 1975, the year after Vietnam officially ended, and spent the next 2.5 decades going everywhere the Marine Corps told him to go. Beirut, 1983, he was 26 years old, stationed at the airport when the truck bomb went off. He was 200 meters away. He lost 3 friends before breakfast. He never talked about Beirut. Desert Storm, 1991. He was a staff sergeant by then, leading a weapons platoon through the oil-smoke darkness of Kuwait. He got a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V for pulling a wounded Marine out of a disabled LAV-25 under fire. He never put that medal on display. His daughter found it in a shoebox when she was helping him move. He did 2 more deployments after that, one to Bosnia, one to Okinawa as a senior instructor, before retiring in 2001 with a chest full of ribbons and knees that ached every time it was going to rain. His wife, Dolly, he called her, had waited for him through all of it, 31 years of marriage. She passed from pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2015, and Raymond buried her in the shade of a magnolia tree in a cemetery on the edge of Cedarwood Falls. After that, he moved to Loblolly Court. He needed a project, he needed routine, he needed somewhere quiet. He converted the 2-car garage into a woodworking shop, built furniture, chairs, tables, cradles for grandchildren on the street, a pew for the local Methodist church that people still comment on to this day. He kept a garden along the south side of the house. Tomatoes, peppers, pole beans. Dolly's rose bush, a pale yellow climber she'd started from a cutting in 1998, grew up the east side of the garage year after year without fail. He coached youth baseball for 3 seasons. He knew every kid on the block by name and most of their parents' names too. He was quiet, he was steady. He was the kind of man who, if you asked him a direct question, would think for a full 5 seconds before he answered it. He had one rule about his driveway. One rule. Don't block it. He had a 2004 Ford F-250 dark blue, slightly beat up, SCMPERFI plate on the front, and he needed that driveway clear because of his left knee. The knee that had been held together with surgical hardware since 2003 gave him trouble on cold mornings, and the garage ramp let him get in and out of the truck without the step up on a regular curb. It wasn't a preference. It was medical necessity. He had a sign, a proper one posted with permission from the county, right at the edge of his property line. Private driveway, no parking, VIOLATORSTOWD owner's expense. White letters, blue background, reflective coating so it showed up at night. He'd never had a problem. Not once. Not until the spring of 2019. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday, May 11th, 2019, to be exact. A gray, drizzly morning, the kind that makes everything look a little flatter than it really is. Number 11 Loblolly Court, the house directly to the right of Raymond's when you stood at the street, had been empty for 4 months after old Dale Hutchins moved to an assisted living facility near his daughter in Knoxville. Nice man, Dale, always waved, never once parked where he wasn't supposed to. The moving truck was from a premium company out of Northern Virginia, the kind with a climate-controlled cabin for delicate items and a uniformed crew who wore matching polo shirts. Behind it came a pearl-white 2019 Tesla Model X, those ridiculous falcon wing doors catching the gray morning light like they were showing off. The man who stepped out of it was 31 years old, 6 feet even, athletic in the way that people who pay for personal trainers are athletic, the kind of fit that requires a monthly subscription. His name was Caden Voss. Caden had made his money fast and believed, with the kind of certainty that only early success can manufacture, that this was proof of his superior intelligence. He'd founded a SaaS company in 2014 out of a Vienna, Virginia apartment, some kind of B2B data aggregation platform that Raymond would later describe, without a trace of irony, as computers that sell information about other computers. He'd sold the company in 2018 for $14 million. He was 30 years old post-exit and looking for somewhere to settle while he figured out his next venture. His girlfriend, a lifestyle influencer named Brianna Cole with 140,000 Instagram followers, had picked Cedarwood Falls because it had a vibe. She had already posted about it twice before they'd even unloaded a box. The first red flag arrived before the moving truck was half empty. One of Caden's movers needed to back the truck down the street for a second angle, and Caden, without looking, without asking, simply pulled the Tesla across the bottom of Raymond's driveway and left it there, blocking it completely. Raymond had seen this from his porch. He'd walked down calmly and knocked on the driver's side window. Caden lowered it 2 inches, the universal gesture of a man who considers the conversation already beneath him. "Hey," Raymond said, "that's my driveway you're sitting in. I need it clear." Caden glanced at the driveway, then back at Raymond, then at the driveway again, as if he was doing math. "I'll be like 15 minutes, he said, and raised the window. Raymond stood there for a moment. He looked at the sign on his property line, the one with the white letters. Then he walked back inside and made a phone call. 14 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck from Cedarwood County Towing arrived, hooked up the Tesla, and hauled it to an impound lot on Route 360. Caden came outside mid-hook, polo shirt, no shoes, iced coffee in hand, and his expression went through 5 different emotions in about 3 seconds. "What? Hey, that is a $90,000 car." Raymond was back on his porch by then. "Sign's right there," he said and pointed. Caden stared at the sign like it had personally offended him. That was the first day. Caden paid the impound fee, $412, and collected his Tesla the following Monday. Raymond assumed that was the end of it. He was wrong. 3 days later, a Thursday evening, mild for mid-May, the kind of evening where you leave the windows open and listen to the neighborhood settle, Raymond came home from a hardware run to find the Tesla parked across his driveway again. Not partway, all the way, straddling the apron, angled like Caden had done it on purpose just to see how much he could cover. Raymond sat in his truck for a moment, then he called the tow company. This time, Caden was home. He came out fast, still in what appeared to be work clothes, a quarter zip and joggers, and he walked up to Raymond's truck with the practiced confidence of a man who'd never experienced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. "Okay, we need to talk about this," Caden said. "I don't know what your problem is, but this seems like an overreaction." Raymond got out of the truck slowly, left knee first, right hand on the frame, the way he always did. "My problem," Raymond said, "is that sign right there says no parking and you keep parking. It's a driveway, you're not even using it right now. Doesn't matter if I'm using it. I was going to be 10 minutes. Doesn't matter how long." Caden spread his hands like he was dealing with someone who didn't understand basic logic. "Look, I get it, this is your property, fine, but we're neighbors. There's a thing called being reasonable, being a community." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. "Son," he said, "I served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps. I know a little bit about community. You want to be part of this one, you start by reading signs." Caden's jaw tightened. "Listen, old man, this isn't your little army base anymore." Raymond didn't flinch, didn't blink. "No," he said quietly, "it's not." He turned and walked back to his porch. The tow truck arrived 9 minutes later. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever genuinely tried, to be reasonable with someone who has already decided that reasonable doesn't apply to them? Someone who has never once in their entire life been told no by someone they couldn't simply outspend or outlast? Drop a comment below and tell me how that went, because this next part, this is where it gets worse before it gets better. Here's what nobody knew about Raymond Kowalski at the time, and this is important, so I need you to remember it. Raymond had a brother-in-law named Gerald Fitch. Gerald had spent 30 years as a licensed surveyor for Chesterfield County. He'd surveyed Loblolly Court in 1989. He still had the original plat maps in his filing cabinet, at home 30 minutes away. Raymond didn't call Gerald yet, he filed that detail away. He was patient, he was going to need it later. For now, he did something else. He went to the hardware store and he bought 3 things: a 4K security camera system, 4 cameras, wide-angle night vision, a weatherproof notebook with a hard black cover, and a box of heavy-duty zip ties. He mounted camera 1 above the garage door, facing the driveway and the street. Camera 2 went on the northeast corner of the house, covering the side yard and the fence line. Camera 3 went on the back porch, facing the back property line. Camera 4 he mounted inside the workshop window, discreetly, with a clear line of sight to the rear gate. He started the notebook on May 18, 2019. May 18, 7:14 a.m. White Tesla Model X, Virginia plate LXV9201, blocking driveway apron. Tow called. Voss came out, verbal exchange, no physical contact. Tow truck arrived 7:23 a.m., vehicle removed. He dated every entry, he noted the time, the temperature, and what happened. He took photographs with his phone and backed them up to a hard drive he kept locked in the gun safe in his bedroom. Caden, meanwhile, seemed to be treating the impound fees as a minor inconvenience. By the end of May, he'd blocked the driveway 4 more times. His car had been towed 4 more times. He'd paid close to $2,000 in fees. He seemed to regard this as a tax, annoying but manageable. And then he escalated. Early June, Raymond found a trash bag torn open and scattered across his front yard. Dog waste, old food containers, something that smelled strongly of fish. No witnesses. But camera 1 had caught a figure in a hoodie walking along the fence line at 2:17 a.m. The image was grainy, the figure was careful, but the shoes were distinctive, white and neon green. Raymond had seen those shoes on Caden's front porch. He wrote it down, he saved the footage. The following week, his mailbox was knocked over, Clean at the base, not a car accident, the kind of pop that happens when something deliberate hits it. Camera 2 caught nothing that night. There had been a power flicker. Raymond noted the gap and installed a battery backup for the cameras. Then, on a Tuesday morning in the second week of June, Raymond found a white piece of paper tucked under his front windshield wiper. It was a letter from the Cedarwood Falls Homeowners Association. A formal complaint had been filed. The letter cited unsightly storage of equipment and materials visible from the public right-of-way, referencing Raymond's workshop supplies neatly stacked under a proper tarp beside the garage, and requested they be removed or enclosed within 30 days or face a $150 fine. The complaint had been filed by a resident of Loblolly Court. The HOA didn't disclose who. Raymond folded the letter, put it in the notebook, and started researching the HOA bylaws that afternoon. Here's the thing about Raymond Kowalski. He'd spent 26 years in an organization where you either knew the rules better than the enemy or you lost. He read every page of those bylaws, both versions, the 2009 original and the 2017 amendment. He took notes in the margins in pencil. He found three things. First, the unsightly storage clause had a specific definition of what qualified, and his tarped workshop supplies did not meet it. Second, HOA complaints required a documented warning before a fine could be assessed. No warning had been issued. Third, anonymous complaints were not permitted under the 2017 amendment. Every complaint required the complainant's name on file with the board, even if not shared with the respondent. He typed a 4-paragraph letter to the HOA board, citing specific bylaw sections by number, and requested a written confirmation that the complaint had been properly filed and that the complainant had identified themselves as required. The HOA never fined him. He wrote that down too. Direct hit. Now let me pause here again, because I want to ask you something. Have you ever documented everything, every little detail when a situation started going wrong? Just quietly, patiently building your case? Or did you confront first and document second? Tell me in the comments. Because the discipline Raymond shows here, that's not something most people have. But he learned it the hard way, in places where losing your cool meant losing something permanent. July 4th, 2019. Hot, thick Virginia summer heat, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt and sits heavy in your chest. The whole street had people out, kids with sparklers. The Okaforce had a portable speaker going. Somebody was grilling ribs 2 houses down, and the smoke hung sweet and low. Raymond sat on his porch in the evening cool and watched the neighborhood he loved do what neighborhoods are supposed to do on Independence Day. He had a glass of sweet tea. He thought about Dolly. He looked at the rose bush on the side of the garage. It was blooming, 8 or 9 pale yellow flowers open exactly the way she'd loved them. He'd fertilized it in April the way she'd shown him. He talked to it sometimes when nobody was around. He knew how that sounded. He didn't particularly care. He went to bed around 10, the fireworks still popping in the distance. He was up at 5:30 the next morning as always. He made coffee. He went to the garage to start on a commission piece, a writing desk for a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. He walked along the side of the house on his way. He stopped. The rose bush was gone. Not trimmed, not damaged, gone. Pulled from the ground, the climbing canes that had been attached to the garage trellis were yanked down, shredded. The root ball had been dug out, clumsily, savagely, and the whole plant lay in the side yard like something discarded. Dolly had started that rose bush from a cutting given to her by her own mother. She'd carried it through 6 moves in 30 years. She'd replanted it herself in this yard on a warm day in the spring of 2015, 3 months before the diagnosis. Raymond stood there. He looked at what was left. He bent down slowly, left knee protesting, and picked up one of the cut canes, one pale yellow bud not yet open, still attached. He held it in his hand for a long moment. Then he set it down gently. He stood up. He walked back inside. He sat at his kitchen table, opened the black notebook, and wrote the date, the time, and a single sentence. Rose bush destroyed overnight, July 4th into July 5th. Footage to be reviewed. Then he called Gerald Fitch. Gerald, he said, I need those plat maps. Direct hit. If you think Raymond is going to let this go, you don't know anything about what it means to have something sacred taken from you, and you've never met a man like Raymond Earl Kowalski. Don't go anywhere, because what he found next changed everything. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Not Caden Voss, not his girlfriend Brianna with her 140,000 followers, not the HOA, not anybody on Loblolly Court. Nobody knew about the fence. When Caden had moved in, one of the first things he'd done was replace the old chain-link fence between his property and Raymond's with a new cedar privacy fence. 6 feet tall, pressure-treated posts, very clean. Brianna had featured it in an outdoor refresh post that got 11,000 likes. It was a nice fence. It was also 9 inches over the property line. 9 inches onto Raymond Kowalski's land. Gerald Fitch drove out on July 7th with the original 1989 survey plat and a laser measuring tool. He walked the property line carefully, drove survey stakes at the 4 corners, and measured twice. 9.4 inches, the entire length of the fence, 43 linear feet, was on Raymond's property. In Virginia, this is what's called an encroachment. And encroachments, when they become permanent structures, can, under certain circumstances, eventually become what's called adverse possession. Meaning if you let someone sit on your land long enough without objecting, they can sometimes claim it legally. Raymond had no intention of letting that happen. Gerald wrote up a formal survey report, dated, stamped, signed. Raymond took it to a real estate attorney in Richmond named Patricia Osibonsu. She was 61 years old, had been practicing property law for 30 years, and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain that she had a habit of taking off and setting on her desk when she was about to say something important. She took off the glasses. "You have a clean encroachment case," she said. "The fence goes, they pay for removal. You could also pursue damages for the loss of access to that section of your property," and she tapped the folder. "If we can establish that the rose bush destruction was deliberate and connected to this same party, you have a separate civil claim for destruction of property with sentimental value." "What about the camera footage from July 4th?" Raymond asked. She nodded slowly. "That depends on what it shows." Here's what the camera showed. At 1:47 a.m. on July 5th, Caden Voss, in dark clothing, carrying a garden spade, came through the back gate of his property, moved along the fence line, and spent 11 minutes pulling the rose bush out of the ground. His face was visible for 4 seconds near camera 2's field of view when a motion sensor light from the Yoon house next door briefly illuminated the side yard. 4 seconds, but 4K is 4K. Raymond sent the footage to Patricia Osibonsu. She called back in 2 hours. "File everything," she said. But Raymond wasn't done yet. He spent 3 evenings over the next 2 weeks doing something he was very good at: research. Systematic, methodical, patient research, the kind he'd done in 2.5 decades of service when knowing your adversary meant the difference between mission success and something worse. He Googled Caden Voss. He found the SaaS company sale public record, covered in 2 tech blogs. He found Brianna's Instagram. He found something else buried in a Northern Virginia Business Forum thread from 2017, a post from a former employee of Caden's company alleging that the data aggregation platform had been collecting user information without proper consent disclosures and selling it to third-party marketing firms. The poster had included a link to an FTC complaint form. Raymond didn't know if anything had come of that complaint, but he knew someone who would know. His name was Marcus Webb. Master Sergeant Marcus Webb, retired. They'd served together in Desert Storm. Marcus had gone on to work for 22 years as an investigator with the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection. Raymond called him on a Tuesday evening. Marcus called back on Thursday. "Raymond," he said, "I can't tell you what we have or don't have on any particular company. You understand that?" "I understand that," Raymond said. A pause. "But I can tell you," Marcus said slowly, "that a man in your position, with the kind of documented evidence you're describing, might want to make sure his attorney is talking to the right people sooner rather than later, and that the wheels of federal oversight can sometimes move faster than people expect when the evidence is clean and organized." Raymond wrote that down. Then he closed the notebook. Then he went to check on the garden. The rose bush was gone, but he'd saved the root ball. He'd put it in a pot with fresh soil, watered it carefully, and set it in the south window of the workshop where it got good light. One of the cut canes had started putting out a leaf. He looked at that leaf for a long time. "All right, Dolly," he said softly, "here we go." Tuesday morning, August 27th, 2019. The air in Cedarwood Falls was already thick by 6:30, the way Virginia late August gets, not hot yet but promising, the kind of humidity that means by noon it'll feel like breathing through a wet wool coat. Birds going at it in the oaks. Somebody 2 streets over already had a lawn mower going. Raymond Kowalski was on his porch with his coffee at 6:45, same as every morning. At 7:03, 2 vehicles turned onto Loblolly Court. The first was a white Chesterfield County Sheriff's Cruiser. The second was an unmarked dark blue Chevy Suburban with federal plates. They parked in front of number 11. At 7:07, a silver sedan pulled up and a woman in a business suit got out carrying a manila envelope and a clipboard. She was a process server. At 7:12, 2 men in navy blue windbreakers got out of the Suburban. They had lanyards and badges. They stood on the sidewalk with the patient, unhurried energy of people who are absolutely certain they're in the right place at the right time. At 7:15, the Chesterfield County Sheriff's deputy walked up the front path of number 11 and rang the doorbell. Nothing happened for 45 seconds. The door opened. Caden Voss stood there in a gray bathrobe, a pour-over coffee mug in one hand, hair unstyled. He looked at the deputy. He looked at the federal agents on the sidewalk. He looked at the woman with the clipboard. He looked back at the deputy. His face went through several stages of processing. "Caden Ellis Voss," the deputy said. "Yeah," Caden said, barely above a whisper. The process server stepped forward and handed him the manila envelope. "You've been served," she said pleasantly. "Civil action, Chesterfield County Circuit Court. Encroachment and property damage. A plaintiff is Raymond E. Kowalski. You'll find the court date on page 3. Caden stared at the envelope. One of the federal agents stepped forward and presented his credentials. FTC, Bureau of Consumer Protection. He explained in precise and unhurried language that they had a warrant to inspect certain business records related to Voss Digital Solutions LLC and its predecessor entity, including but not limited to user data handling practices and third-party data sales from 2015 through 2018. He had paperwork for that too. Caden looked across the street. Then he looked next door. Raymond Kowalski was on his porch. Black coffee, both hands around the mug. He was watching the sunrise over the tree line, the way the gold came up through the oaks and made everything sharp and quiet. He didn't look at Caden. He didn't need to. On the south side of the garage, a county contractor arrived at 8:15 with a reciprocating saw and a post puller. By court order, Patricia Osibonsu had moved fast. The cedar privacy fence was required to be removed within 5 business days. The contractor started at the south post. Brianna came outside in a silk robe to film it for Instagram. Nobody was sure why. The civil suit Patricia had filed was comprehensive. Encroachment damages, destruction of personal property, the rose bush, valued with emotional distress consideration at a total award request of $287,000. Attorney's fees, towing expenses from the prior incidents, documented to the penny in the black notebook. HOA complaint filing costs. The total ask on the civil side was $412,000. Raymond had also provided his 4-camera, date time-stamped footage of every incident, including the July 5th footage of Caden pulling the rose bush, to both Patricia and, separately, to the Chesterfield County Sheriff as evidence for a potential criminal mischief charge. The criminal mischief charge was filed on August 29th, 2 days after the civil suit was served. Caden Voss retained a criminal defense attorney in Richmond. Retainer, $25,000. The FTC investigation was separate and Raymond had nothing formal to do with it. He hadn't filed the complaint. Marcus had simply confirmed that the wheels were already turning. But the timing, as they say, was not great for Caden. The fence came down by Wednesday afternoon. 9.4 inches of Raymond's side yard returned to him in the form of a strip of bare dirt. He stood at the edge of it for a while. He had a plan for that dirt too. The street went quiet the way streets do when something significant has happened and everyone has processed it privately, but nobody has yet talked about it publicly. Mrs. Patricia Yoon from number 4 came by that Thursday evening with a tin of cookies. She stood at Raymond's porch and said very simply, "We knew something was going to happen, Raymond, we just didn't know what." She handed him the cookies. She went home. The Okafors sent their oldest son over Saturday morning to help Raymond plant some new border plantings where the fence had been. The boy was 16, strong, and asked good questions. Raymond showed him how to read a property plat, how to set a string line, how to plant something straight. Number 11 had gone quiet. Caden and Brianna had stopped appearing on the porch. Brianna's Instagram went from daily posts to one every 4 or 5 days, and the outdoor lifestyle content had been replaced with vague captions about navigating challenges and trusting the process. The comments were not kind. The Chesterfield County Circuit Court civil case moved forward. Caden's lawyer filed 2 motions to delay. Both were denied. In November 2019, the case went to mediation at the insistence of the court. Caden's team came to the table with an offer of $85,000. Patricia Osaibansu set the offer aside without reading the number out loud. "My client will accept $340,000, she said, inclusive of fees, not $1 less. Caden's attorney looked at his client. Caden looked at the table. He thought about the footage, the notebook, the 78 days of documented incidents. The photograph of a 4K image showing his face illuminated for 4 seconds on July 5th at 1:47 a.m. He nodded. The mediation concluded at $340,000. Raymond didn't celebrate. He drove home, changed out of his good clothes, and went into the workshop. He had a writing desk to finish. The moving truck arrived at number 11 on January 14, 2020. A gray Tuesday, cold, a skin of ice on the windshields, exhaust rising from idling vehicles like small prayers. Nobody came outside to watch them go. Nobody waved. Caden and Brianna loaded what was left of their furniture. A number of pieces had apparently been sold, based on the Craigslist posts that a few neighbors had noticed, and drove away in the Tesla. Brianna filmed it for a story she titled New Beginnings. She got fewer comments than usual. The FTC investigation into Voss Digital Solutions LLC concluded in March 2021, resulting in a consent decree requiring Caden to pay $1.2 million in civil penalties and agree to a 10-year prohibition on certain data practices. The settlement was public record. Several tech blogs covered it. The coverage was not flattering. Patricia Osaibansu received a handwritten thank you note from Raymond dated February 3, 2020. It was 4 sentences long. She has it framed in her office. Number 11 was purchased in April 2020 by a young family, the Castellanos, David and Maria, with twin 6-year-old girls. David was a high school history teacher. Maria was a pediatric nurse. They introduced themselves to Raymond on the first Saturday, standing at the edge of his driveway, and David shook his hand with both of his. "We heard a little about what happened with the last people," David said. "We want you to know we're not like that." Raymond looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said, "I can tell." He had them over for dinner 3 weeks later. Maria brought a casserole. The girls, who were 6 and afraid of nothing, ran through his garden and asked approximately 400 questions about the tomatoes. He answered every one. And on the east wall of the garage, in the space where the cedar fence had stood for 8 months illegally, Raymond planted a new rose bush. Same species, palest yellow, a climbing variety. He'd propagated it from the cutting he'd saved in the pot on the workshop windowsill, the one that had started putting out a leaf in early August. By the following May, it had reached the first trellis wire. By the May after that, it was blooming. "You know, folks, I've been thinking about Raymond Kowalski a lot since I first heard this story. I keep coming back to the moment on the morning of July 5th when he stood at the side of the house looking at what was left of Dolly's rose bush. He was 62 years old. He'd been in Beirut. He'd been in Kuwait. He'd carried a wounded man out of a burning vehicle. He had a knee full of metal and a bedroom that still had 2 pillows on the bed, even though one of them had been empty for 4 years. And he didn't rage. He didn't go next door. He didn't make a scene. He picked up one cut cane. He held the bud in his hand. And then he sat down, opened a notebook, and started building his case. That's not passivity, that's not weakness, that's not an old man letting something slide. That is the kind of discipline that takes decades to develop. The kind that comes from understanding, really understanding, that power isn't in how loud you are, it's in how long you can stay quiet and keep working. Caden Voss had money and arrogance and the absolute certainty that every problem in his life was someone else's inconvenience to absorb. Raymond Kowalski had 26 years of knowing exactly when to move and exactly how. That's not a fair fight, it never was. And here is what I want you to take with you today. The most dangerous person in any conflict is not the one making the most noise. It's the one taking notes. It's the one who makes one phone call, quietly, without announcement, to a man named Gerald who has a plat map in a filing cabinet. It's the one who, while the other person is posting on Instagram and filing frivolous HOA complaints, is building a case so clean and organized that the court mediator looks at it and the other side just nods. Raymond didn't set out to destroy Caden Voss. Caden Voss destroyed Caden Voss. Raymond just made sure that when the time came, every piece of evidence was exactly where it needed to be. Never mistake a quiet man for a passive man. Never mistake patience for permission. And never park in a Marine's driveway. Not once. Not twice. Not on the 4th of July. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, if it made you go look up your HOA bylaws, leave a comment, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and we'll see you next time. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.